definitely up to them. So, Bismillah Rahmanir Rahim. Let's begin our pharmacology class. In the yesterday, not the yesterday, Tuesday. On Tuesday, I taught you regarding the nicotinist antagonist. Okay, the depolarizing ones and the non-depolarizing ones. I also told you um, to build up your concept for what is a depolarizing agent, why we call it depolarizing agent, okay, and why we call non-depolarizing agents to some drugs. Okay, then I explained you these higher doses side effects, why we have respiratory paralysis, what is the mechanism of that, of GI and bladder atony, okay, and then why do they see these kind of similar side effects that of cigarette as in when taking nicotine, okay, and then we discussed in the non-depolarizing drugs, and these all of these things were not written there, so when I uploaded these notes are now in your Google Drive, okay, you all can access them, because this topic was not present in your first stage, so I have to make a note of this, and I have to, like, because I have to teach you this, so this is not present in your first stage, okay. So I kind of, whatever I've explained you, I've written it in like short, okay. And now today's topic is neuromuscular junction blockers, and our next topic will be inshallah ta'ala acetylcholine, norepinephrine synthesis from your first aid book and your Lippincott book, okay. So if you remember, we have this M receptor, we have this NN receptor, and then we have this NM receptor. So we have these three receptors. Okay, are we recording the lecture? Yes. Okay. So we have studied the M receptor, so cross that. We have studied the NN receptor drugs too. Okay. So we have studied these two receptor drugs, both agonist and both antagonist. Now we are studying NM. Okay, so we have studied NM agonist. Now it's turn to study NM antagonist, or I can say NM blockers, okay, or NMJ blockers. So we write it in short form like NM, okay. It is basically neuromuscular junction blockers. So people, one thing is really clear, that this is a presynaptic neuron, and this is a postsynaptic neuron. So if the receptors present at this particular level are neuromuscular junction receptors, NMJ receptors, that means this is a neuron present in your skeletal muscles, okay. Just let's say, for example, this is your skeletal muscle. So these are your skeletal muscles, the muscles that perform the voluntary functions of movements that are dependent on your will. If you want to close your hand, you're closing your hand. If you want to open your hand, you're opening your hand. Like, your body does not move automatically. The movement you want to perform by your own self, by your own will, you can perform that action. So that is why we call skeletal muscles as voluntary muscles, that they don't need your permission to perform. They need permission to perform the activity. But the involuntary muscles, like blood vessels, smooth muscles in the gut of your eye, and your eyes, your bladder, your myocardium, your cardiac muscle. So the smooth muscles present in your body anywhere, and the cardiac muscles of the heart, they are involuntary. They perform the action without your permission, okay, automatically. But skeletal muscles, they perform the action you want them to perform, okay. So that's voluntary and involuntary definition. So these NMJs are only present on skeletal muscles. And one thing, when I began this lecture from the first aid book, I told you that we have two types of nervous system. One is an autonomic nervous system, and the other one is the somatic nervous system, okay. Somatic nervous system. So one is autonomic and one is somatic. So the autonomic nervous system have this sympathetic and parasympathetic thing, okay, SY. sympathetic and parasympathetic thing. But the somatic nervous system is a different nervous system. It does not have the same pattern as the pattern of autonomic nervous system. What was the difference between these two? Let's say, for suppose, this is your autonomic nervous system neuron, and there are always two neurons, okay, in autonomic nervous system. So this one is your pre and this one is your post, okay, and this little portion where these two synapse together is the ganglion, okay, and this where the final effect that has been seen is some visceral organ, okay. But when we talk about the somatic nervous system, let's say, for example, this is a neuron of somatic nervous system. Now this is a neuron, and then this is your skeletal muscle. So you see, you only have one neuron when we talk about somatic nervous system. There is no pre and post. There is only one. So this is just one neuron, okay? So let me draw this drawing for you now in the pattern of somatic nervous system. This is a neuron then, right? Okay, this is the axon. I've not drawn a full neuron over here. And then this is your skeletal muscle, okay? This is your skeletal muscle. So keep this concept really clear. We are the NMJ blockers work on the NM receptors, okay, and these NM receptors are present on the skeletal muscles only. Nowhere else in your body you will find these receptors. Make this concept clear. Not on smooth muscles, not on cardiac muscles, only on skeletal muscles. So make this concept clear now, okay? Now let's move to the drugs. So because they are blockers, they are antagonists, they function opposite to what acetylcholine do. In a normal physiology, if we talk about, so this is in the normal physiology, this was the picture which I taught you for the acetylcholine synthesis. Now this is acetylcholine, okay, and let's say, for example, this is your NM receptor, okay, and this is your skeletal muscle receptor, okay, NM receptor. Now your acetylcholine, when it's released from this neuron, presynaptic neuron, because this region is called synapse, okay, so this is a presynaptic neuron, or and this end is a presynaptic end, and this is a postsynaptic end, okay, so make it clear. So now when it's released from the presynaptic neuron and it gets attached to this NM receptor, it performs the similar functions as the all the drugs which are agonists do, which work like acetylcholine. So all the cholinergic agonist drugs just function same as acetylcholine. Whatever acetylcholine do in your body, it is naturally, okay? So when you take it synthetically, like when you are taking drugs, the drugs are not natural, they are synthetic, right? We make it in pharmaceutical laboratories. So when we take this material, which is just same as acetylcholine in a synthetic form or manner, the functions remains the same. But when we take a blocker, when we take an antagonist, a drug that blocks the actions, okay, when we take that thing, it functions opposite to what acetylcholine do, okay? So the NMJ blockers will do all the opposite functions of acetylcholine. Now, if I'll take you to the notes bag, and if I talk about all these drugs that we studied in an antagonist, we studied nicotine, and we studied these non-depolarizing drugs, all of them, they all were doing the opposite functions of acetylcholine and opposite functions of acetylcholine like drugs. Okay, so you will see same functions here too. So make this concept clear. Okay, the functions of these will be opposite to cholinergic effects. And what we read was dumbbells, DUMBBELSS. Okay, we read this dumbbells, which was the cholinergic effect. So all the opposite effects will be these two drugs doing. But these two drugs have a very because the NMJ, because the NM receptor is not present all over your body as muscarinic receptors were. We have M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. All these receptors present in your eyes, in your CNS, in your heart, on your bladder, on your endothelial lining of your blood vessels, on your gut, like everywhere the M receptors were there, right? NM receptors are only present on your skeletal muscles. So you will not be seeing the functions of gut. You will not be seeing the functions of bladder. You will not be seeing the functions on eye. You will not be seeing functions on your uh, on your um, on your bronchus. You will not be seeing functions on your heart. You will not be seeing functions stomach, like no vomiting. Also, you will not be seeing any functions in your tear glands, in your eyes. You will not be seeing functions on in your mouth. So no dryness of mouth, no dryness of mouth. Okay, and you will not be seeing functions on your skin. No increased sweating. So you will not be seeing any muscarinic functions. The only functions you will be seeing will be on your muscles, on your upper limbs, on your lower limbs, on your thoracic muscles, on your abdominal muscles, on your diaphragm, because diaphragm is also a skeletal muscle. Okay, people, so make this concept clear. We will only be focusing on muscles now. In this lecture, while studying the NMJ blockers, we will only be talking about the skeletal muscles of the body. Okay, one thing should be cleared. Now let's move on further. So we have these two drugs, succinylcholine and succinylcholine. Okay, there are other drugs also that are neuromuscular junction blockers. If you see the chart from your Lippincott pharmacology book, uh, just on the first page of cholinergic antagonist chapter, you will see the chart over there, and you will see some other drugs like pancuronium, like atraconium, like others also. Okay, so there are so many, but we are studying these two drugs because they are used clinically still and are very important. Okay, so they are used in the operation theaters for the initiation process of endotracheal tube intubation. Okay, there is this patient who in his mouth we insert the ETT tube. Let me because you people are the students of step 1, you might not know. So this is your endotracheal tube. Okay, this is your endotracheal tube, and it has these three portions. It has these three portions. There is a balloon which is inflated, and then there is this mouthpiece, and then this is the tube which gets inside. Okay, so this is your mouth. This is the portion that is stuck in your mouth. Okay, and this is the balloon part which goes inside your trachea. Okay, and we have this measuring also, and then we have this little ports to inflate this balloon and to deflate this balloon. So in order to let the tube inside and it should not come out, we have to inflate this balloon when we insert. So that's another process on how to insert a endotracheal tube. So this is an endotracheal tube, okay? And if I so what we do in these patients is before giving them the drug for paralysis in the surgeries, when you have to give GA, general anesthesia, when you have to give general anesthesia to patient, you have to do two things. You have to give two drugs. One for paralysis of whole body paralysis. Okay, no movements should be there, not even in your diaphragm. Your diaphragm should also be paralyzed. Okay, so we give these drugs for paralysis of the whole body. Okay, and then we give another drug to sedate the patient. Okay, so we give a sedative too. So we give two drugs. In general anesthesia, there are two drugs that are given. One for complete sedation, okay, and one for the complete paralysis of your body, including your diaphragm, okay. So now, when your patient's diaphragm is paralyzed, there is no movement in the patient's diaphragm. First, let's say, for suppose, this is your trunk. Okay, this is umbilicus, this is your trunk, this is your neck. So from your neck to your umbilicus and a little to your umbilicus, basically from your neck to your umbilicus, we call it trunk. Okay, then this is the pelvic region. Okay, and your trunk is divided into two parts via a muscle which is called a diaphragm. So this is your diaphragm. Okay, and the cavity which is present above your diaphragm is your thoracic cavity, and the cavity which is present below the diaphragm is your abdominal cavity. Okay, now if this diaphragm is paralyzed, there will be no movement, no inspiration and expiration, because diaphragm is the chief muscle. Diaphragm is the chief muscle of respiration. Okay, you respire, you inspire and expire, inhale and exhale air because of this diaphragm. Okay, so if your diaphragm is paralyzed, no movements of your lungs. Okay, no inhalation, no exhalation, the patient can die. But in order to do surgeries, when you paralyze this diaphragm, this is skeletal muscle, by these two drugs, you either give this or you give this. The most used drugs is succinylcholine in certain setups. Okay, so when you use any of these drugs to paralyze the diaphragm, you have to, before doing that, before paralyzing the diaphragm, you have to insert the endotracheal tube. You have to do endotracheal intubation. The tube is called ETT, but the process is called ET intubation, that is endotracheal intubation. So you enter this tube, you enter this tube, okay, into your patient's trachea, okay, and once it's entered, you connect your patient to the ventilator, to the there is always a ventilator machine in the surgery rooms. Okay, so you connect your patient to that machine. Okay, and once the patient is connected to that machine, the patient is ventilating artificially. You are giving artificial ventilation to the patient in the entire surgical process, and this diaphragm is paralyzed. The patient is not, that you will see the chest going up and down, you will see the chest movements, but that chest movements is not because of the diaphragm. It is because of artificial ventilation that you're providing to the patient. okay? And in order to keep your mouth, like if I'll show you your mouth floor, okay? No. Okay, so if I'll kind of uh, show you this diagram here. If I show you this diagram here, you see this is the floor of your mouth and this is your tongue. This is your tongue. So your tongue is attached to your floor of your mouth. But when you insert the ET tube, your tongue is here. Your tongue is present here. So your mouth is opened by the presence of ET tube. Okay, your mouth is opened by the presence of ET tube. So please remember the therapeutic use of these NMJ blockers, that is endotracheal intubation. So I took a lot of time to explain you what is endotracheal intubation. So please remember this. Another therapeutic use is electroconvulsive shock treatment. The psychiatrists usually give this electroconvulsive shock treatment to the patients who are in extreme depression. Okay, you will study in psychiatry, or you have been studied that in your medical school, major depressive disorder. Okay, MDD we call it. So in that, when the patient is in the last stage of MDD, which is suicidal ideation, we have to give the electroconvulsive shock treatment to the patient. Okay, we call it DC shock also, like uh, cardioversion. Okay, so we call it that also. So so in for that purposes, what we do when we give those shock to the patient, we give those electrical signals, electrical impulses to the patient to activate the patient's brain and his whole body. Okay, so we use these drugs in these shock treatments also. Okay, but not too much, because there are many other drugs for this purposes. So this like does not actually help. So when after giving those shock, when the patients are in hyperactive condition, like the body goes in extreme sympathetic mode, we have to, and the muscles are twitching and there are fasciculations in the muscle, and we have to kind of stop that for some time or some while. We give these NMJ blockers to control that excessive muscular movements, because these drugs paralyze the skeletal muscles. Okay, so please remember these things. Now, so I guess you understand the therapeutic uses of these drugs. Now, if I move to the side effects, the most important part, is your side effect profile. Okay, so let's take it one by one. Now, malignant hypertension. What is malignant? Why we call it malignant? Just as I told you, we have a terminology, hypotension, that is decreased blood pressure, but then we have orthostatic hypotension, which is positional. So if you remember, I've explained you. Similarly, we have another terminology which we call malignant hypertension. What happens in malignant is there is this is actually serious. Okay, this is actually very serious, because it leads you to some drastic, life threatening changes in your body, and it leads you to a vicious cycle. Okay, so I will talk about the three features of malignant hypertension. If you want to write in your notes, you can write it. So, one of them is like increased body temperature. We call it hyperthermia. Okay, so you should know, uh, because anyone can ask you in your hospital life too, apart from your exams. What are the three key features of malignant hypertension? How do you know the patient is in malignant hypertension? So you should know that the body temperature should be more than 37 degrees centigrade, or it should be, I have drawn symbol of less. Okay, more than 37 degrees centigrade or more than 98.6 degree Fahrenheit, which is your normal body temperature. Okay, so it should be more than that. Hyperthermia, okay, normally it is more than 40. In individuals, you'll see in hospital setup, you will see it in more than 40. Okay, but like according to theoretically, if we talk about according to books, so it should be more than normal, so that we call hyperthermia. Okay, or we can also call it pyrexia, which is called fever. Okay, so you may see some people say, or in some books it's written pyrexia instead of hyperthermia. So pyrexia is fever. Okay, and in the definition of fever is like temperature more than 37 degrees centigrade or 98.6 degree Fahrenheit. Okay, then number two is like obviously hypertension. So increased blood pressure is your another feature. Okay, the blood pressure should be raised. So what is a normal blood pressure? 120/80 according to the books, if the patient is symptomatic. So many people have normally many people have blood pressure which is more than 120/80, but we don't call them hypertensive because they're normal. So similarly, many people have blood pressure which is less than 120/80, but we don't call them hypotensive because because they are doing normal with that. So the proper definition for an increased blood pressure or a decreased blood pressure should be added with the word symptomatic. Okay, so if you're talking about increased blood pressure, it should be more than 120/80, along with the patient should give symptoms of increased blood pressure like headache, like nausea, like dizziness. Okay, so like these symptoms. So or in extreme cases, your the eyes, the arteries of your eyes are edematous, so we call it papilloedema. So we see also that in very high blood pressure. So in this case also, this is crucial. Okay, so increased blood pressure is another point. And then the very important third point is metabolic acidosis. Okay, now this is another concept, and you will study these acidosis and alkalosis in very much detail in renal physiology. So metabolic acidosis is our third point. So what happens in metabolic acidosis is there are two terminologies, like in one we add this metabolic, in one we don't. So acidosis is simple pH more than, what I'm writing, pH more than 7.45. Okay, so the normal blood pH is 7.35 to 7.45. Okay, this is your normal blood pH, but when you are in metabolic acidosis, the pH rises from 7.45. And when we talk about alkalosis, we are running again short of time, people, so it's like 40 minutes. So if the lecture suddenly stops, please join it again. Okay, because I wanna complete it. So, and I made a mistake while talking to you. So 7.35. Okay, so I made this mistake. I'm always confused in these less and more symbols. So this is less. Okay, so for acidosis, your pH should be less than 7.35, and for alkalosis it should be more than 7.45. Okay, and then metabolic, because we see the carbon dioxide levels, we see the oxygen levels, we see the bicarbonates. So this is the condition, and you will also see ketone bodies in the blood. So to kindly make your concepts clear, okay, so these are the three things which you will be seeing in your textbooks about malignant hypertension, but when you work in a hospital setup, there are two more points to remember. So I will write it number 4 over here. Okay, so it is like tachycardia. So in hospital setup, your patient's heart rate will be more than 100 beats per minute, BPM. Okay, so brady is less than 60 and tachy is more than 100. So the patient will be tachycardiac. Okay, and you will see hypertonia. Very important, hypertonia. Hypertonia means excessive muscle tone, or you can call it muscle rigidity. So now there are 5 points you need to remember. Hyperthermia, increased blood pressure, metabolic acidosis, okay, tachycardia, and hypertonia. So keep these things in your mind regarding your malignant hypertension. Okay, so now now there is one concept when your body temperature is this much high, okay, this much high, so will there be excessive sweating or not? What do you see when you have a fever? You don't sweat in fever, okay? When the fever is going away, when the fever subsides, then you sweat. So if you're having fever, you're not sweating. So there will be decreased sweating in these patients. And the antagonist effect is decreased sweating. The cholinergic effect is increased sweating. If you remember from dumbbells, like 1S was for increased sweating. Okay, so there is this question, I guess. Any question, Rocks? Are you having any question? Do you have any question? You raised your hand. No? Okay, I guess it was like by mistake, I guess. If you have any question, you can like ask me in chat, I will answer you, okay? So, okay. In tachycardia, there was a mistake, I think, in the sign. In the sign? Oh yes, I have this problem with these signs. I don't know. I have always remembered this L for less, and this symbol looks like L, but I always make mistakes when I draw signs. So thank you so much. Okay, so please remember these points: hyperthermia, increased blood pressure, metabolic acidosis, tachycardia, and hypertonia. And remember the values also, okay? And we will study metabolic acidosis in detail, but for now, like, we will study the difference between metabolic acidosis and the metabolic alkalosis, and then respiratory acidosis and respiratory alkalosis. That's a physiology topic. But for now, you just have to remember that the pH should be less than the lowest limit of the normal pH, that is 7.35. Okay, and because it is metabolic, so what do you think bicarbonates will be? It will be more, or it will be less? So it will be less. Okay, so the arterial level of your bicarbonates will be less. Okay, and if if I'm not wrong, it should be less than 18. So please check this value in your books also. Okay, so what it is. So this was all about malignant hypertension. Very important. Please don't forget the the points for malignant hypertension. Okay, now let's move to another side effect, which is apnea. Okay, so why, what is apnea? Like, we use this terminology. A means no. Okay, A means no, and then we have this pnea for breathing. So no breathing. The patient, because this is affecting on your diaphragm. Diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, so your diaphragm is paralyzing. When your diaphragm is paralyzing, the side effect would be no breathing. You will not be able to breathe normally. Okay, so the reason for apnea will be diaphragmatic paralysis. Okay, so please remember this. Then we have number 3, which is hyperkalemia. Okay, so apnea is simple. I have explained you the process. Okay, now hyperkalemia. So hyperkalemia means increased potassium levels. So what is the normal range of your potassium? It is 3.5 to 5.5. Okay, 3.5 to 5.5. So your potassium will be more than 5.5. Okay, so then you will see hyperkalemia. But the question is, why hyperkalemia? Why this side effect? So now if I'm like clearing this. Okay, so let's talk about hyperkalemia. This is a skeletal muscle. Okay, and let's say this is sarcoplasmic reticulum now. So this is a sarcoplasmic reticulum of your skeletal muscle. There is calcium stored in here. Okay, this is calcium stored in here. So your calcium, because your muscle is paralyzed and you're not able to perform movements, the calcium will move from your sarcoplasmic reticulum to your blood. So anything which has EMIA in it means blood. Emia means blood. Okay, so more calcium will move into your blood. Okay, and then there are these receptors which are present here for the it is called sodium potassium co-transporter. Okay, so this sodium potassium co-transporter, what it do is, sodium gets into your muscle. Okay, and potassium into your cell, I must say, into your cell. Okay, and potassium goes out into blood. So sodium goes in and potassium goes out, and there is this ratio of 3 sodium and 2 potassium. Always remember this. Okay, so in all these cells of your body, they have this transporter. If the recording stops after 1 minute, please join again, so we will continue the lecture. Okay, so it's like less than 1 minute time remaining from the same link that's being posted in WhatsApp. So your potassium is going out. Okay, so because of sodium influx, there is like depolarization mechanism going on inside. Okay, so ultimate result will be calcium out. But this is this drug which is causing this side effect, because you are stopping this drug from performing that depolarization activity. But at first, because these drugs are like kind of binded to the